Good morning, everybody. Margaret Lowe, when she started, noted that we've been having these conversations in a lot of cities around the country. And really, in virtually every city, officials and citizens are examining their criminal justice system through the lens of public safety, opportunity, inequity, poverty, and how they all come together in the different issues that the criminal justice system is trying to grapple with. And I have found it's very revealing to start by asking people kind of the broadest question, which is, what is the biggest challenge that you see today in the way the criminal justice system is operating in New Orleans? And is the city, the community, and the state on track to addressing that problem? So maybe, Mr. Public Defender, I'll start with you.
Okay. The biggest problem?
Define kind of the biggest problem that you think that needs to be addressed, and is it being addressed?
Well, I think for me, the biggest problem in our criminal justice system is our user pay structure here in Louisiana. We have a user pay criminal justice system. We depend on fines, fees, and costs at a level unprecedented and is not seen statewide anywhere else in the country. And that has yielded some just sort of funny things, some weird incentives, either on paper or in actuality, that make our system inequitable, unfair, and for different parts of the system, it renders them inadequate, unpredictable, and unreliable in their ability to provide the service and hold up their obligations inside of our criminal justice system. I mean, pulling back as well, I think that the root of that sort of dysfunction comes from a history of inequity, of racism, of slavery that has yet to be dealt with. Now, is the state, is the city on a path to fix that? And I think with some of what was heard in the prior panel, you see regular folk mobilizing and coming together, trying to make this better, demanding change, wanting things to be done differently. And you have leadership in different places that have made movements, some incrementally, some actually very large steps in other realms, who are trying to do it as well. But it has not been coordinated, and I think there are still many adversaries and naysayers to getting away from what has been a huge problem in our criminal justice system. So I don't think from an institutional level the trajectory is right. I think from a people level it probably is.
Judge, thank you.
So I think that each of us probably could identify something different, obviously coming from the different perspectives. Right. I think that from the court perspective, or from my perspective being on the court now, one of the things would be just the idea that what has worked in the past isn't working today, especially to help reduce crime and to see, the violent crime especially go down. I think that the ideas of over-incarceration, we had like the war on drugs, those types of things, even the idea of like a multiple bill, none of those things are truly affecting our crime rate in a positive way. And so to me, the notion of the biggest challenge is that we have to inform the public, and the public needs to be aware of how those things play out and what effects they have had on, or they have not had, obviously, on the actual crime rate, and how we embrace new ideas and new ways of going forward. Because I think from the perspective of the court, we oftentimes don't have the opportunity or the ability to say anything or to speak for ourselves. As judges, our hands are tied a lot of times to make comments on cases or make comments on our positions on different ideas or different sentences that we may import. And so it is very hard to give the public or to educate the public on what is actually going on from a judge's perspective.
We definitely want you to feel free to speak for yourself for the next 25 minutes.
Well, to the extent that I can.
Mr. Sheriff?
I think twofold. I think on the one hand, I can agree with some of what Mr. Bunton said. Certainly financing is a big deal. On the other hand, we have to work together better. And when on the financing note, there are some agencies that are overly funded and some that are starved. And working together, some people who perhaps shouldn't be incarcerated, and other people who need to have a better place to be other than jail. You know, over the last 15 years, we've decreased the population from 6,000 to now 1,100. Now, is that the right number? Probably not. Probably we can get it even lower, but we have an opportunity to help people while they're there and help them come out better, because eventually most people that get arrested do come back out.
Yeah. Mr. DA?
I guess the biggest problem I see is, in a word, recidivism. Unfortunately, I see a number of people who have committed offenses, they have been given some consideration, and they come back into the system, and we see them coming back over and over and over again. And to a large extent, from my perspective, that is very frustrating. And I guess from the perspective of the criminal justice system, it is also frustrating, because I think the responsibility of each of us is to sort of twofold, provide two services, so to speak. One, see to it that the individual who comes in the system never comes back into that system again. Then we can point to his or her case as a success. And secondly, I think we try to make them a better person. When they come out of the system, we would like to think that they are better than when they went in the system. I think a big problem that we see in our criminal justice system, and again, the emphasis should always be on education. Education, education, education. The vast majority of the people who we see who come into the criminal justice system don't even have a GED, much less a high school diploma. If we can just work on that, when they come into the system, be they be placed on probation or whether they're given a jail sentence, and you can successfully get that GED, the studies seem to indicate that that person has a significant chance of never coming back into the system. We also have to address the mental health issues that we see quite frequently in our criminal justice system. I know we're, to some extent, in the city of New Orleans, in a battle over that, about trying to fund mental health treatment, putting facilities in place. It's as the sheriff said, funding is always going to be an issue, but that is a major concern. Substance abuse counseling is another big problem. A significant majority of the people who come into our criminal justice system, in addition to not having an education, they have a substance abuse problem. When they come into the system, it's incumbent upon us to try to get them to solve that problem. We've got to address that issue. And again, the things like job training and job skills, if you can keep someone employed, there's a good chance that person, again, does not come back into the system.
Church, a couple data points. In that 1,100 or so population that you now have, what share, roughly, are recidivists, and what share have some kind of mental health challenge or problem?
So mental health, probably 65% have some diagnosis of some mental health issue. Recidivism, 75 to 80% of the people that are currently incarcerated have been arrested or incarcerated before.
Yeah.
And that's really the big problem. You know, the big problem is that this revolving door, people talk about the revolving door, but something has to be done about it. You know, how do you intervene and help someone? Look, we have a great partnership right now with the Orleans Parish School Board. We have an actual school where they give diplomas, not high set, a real diploma, and that creates a culture inside that says we value education. And we have graduations where they come in to pomp and circumstance and walk with the gowns, and you know, those are little things, but coming back out, it makes them in a better place.
But can
Yeah,
I
sure, you
interject
bet.
1 second?
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that we may be missing, right, as we talk about recidivism and as you look at this, but for people that are incarcerated, what also adds to the recidivism is the fact that you have, while people sit in jail, they're losing their jobs, their families are being affected. And so the idea is that then it's not just the lack of education, but it's a breakdown in so many other things that people then resort to the same activity. So it's not necessarily just recidivism because they keep committing crime. It is because the systems fall down altogether.
Yeah, you know, Mr. Public Defender, can I ask you about that? Because Mr. Henderson, who was on the previous panel, was talking last night that, essentially when you come out of incarceration, you get $10 and a bus ticket. And when you see people who are coming back into your office for a second time or a third time, what has their experience typically been after their initial release? Is there a structure there to help them avoid getting back sitting on the other side of the desk from you?
Well, before that, the first thing I want to say, given the definitions articulated already, I'm a recidivist. So let's understand that we have a system that tries to simplify the great variety and diversity of humanity. This is a human endeavor. And this one-size-fits-all is what screws us up all the time, right? So we need to reorient how we think about this. And getting to your question, if the problem is substance abuse and the symptom is crime, I don't go to jail to get drug treatment. I go to a hospital, right? If the problem is education and the symptom is crime, I don't go to jail to learn. I go to a school. Keep us in school, keep us in hospitals like regular folk. And I say us because this is largely aimed at the poorest and most vulnerable in our communities, folks of color. Folks of color ought not be learning that jail is the place to get your diploma. Ought not be learning that you get mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment in a jail. We need to reorient ourselves so that when we find those recidivists, and those are the sort of chronic folks who come back into our system, they are not recidivists. They are Derwyn Bunton. They are Lindsay Hortenstein, who's out here from my office. I had to shout out. They are folk, right? Look at them as folk. Don't put them in a recidivist box. Put them in a person box who needs some work and give them the work. And then when you build systems that reorient around the idea that we get into our communities and fix these things, then you get away from 1,000, 2,000, 7,000 people in prison because we no longer have the idea you get fixed in jail.
Of course.
Yeah.
And look, noble, sounds good, but people do get arrested.
Yeah.
People do go to jail. And I don't think Mr. Bunton would suggest that we let them rot away and do nothing. No, so yes, we ought to do mental health treatment while they're there, and we ought to do education while they're there, because they are there. Now, let them get out into the community, and the community should support them with mental health treatment, with substance abuse treatment. But for the time that they're there, we can't waste that time.
Mr. J, do you want to respond to that?
I think the sheriff is correct. And look, I certainly agree with Mr. Bunton. I would hope that long before someone got arrested, if there was a substance abuse problem or a mental health issue or an education or a job problem, that those things would be addressed. But unfortunately, in many cases, they are not addressed. And as a result of that, we see the person involved in some criminal conduct. Now, in just about every case, the judge, and I think the judge would agree with this, you're going to give someone, a first offender, you're going to give them an opportunity. You're going to put them on probation. You're not going to throw the first offender in jail. And you're going to put conditions on that probation that the judge realizes or recognizes would prevent that person from coming back into the system again, like education, substance abuse counseling, job training, mental health treatment. And the problem that we see in many of the circumstances in where they end up in Sheriff Gusman's jail is because they don't comply with those conditions of probation. They sometimes they thumb their nose at them. They simply defy them. And when they're in the jail, it seems to me that it's important that the sheriff, as he said, don't just let them sit there and warehouse them, but try to do something constructive with them. Try to make it so that they never come back to the jail again. And I think, look, I applaud the sheriff for the educational programs that he has. I applaud him for the work release programs that he has. Again, they are making efforts to try to get people in mental health treatment, substance abuse counseling. Those are things that make us better and make us stronger as a society and prevent people from coming back into the system.
Let me stick with you, Mr. Day, and move on a little bit. The city has reduced its jail population substantially. It is committed now to reduce it by another 20% over the next several years. Do you believe this endangers public safety in New Orleans? For you.
To me?
To you.
I think that right now in the jail, I think the sheriff has around 1,100 inmates in the jail as of this moment. I think it's like 90% of the inmates are there because they are there for violent crimes. Again, the majority of the inmates now are not there for minor misdemeanor offenses. And again, so to reduce the jail population in some cases to just for the purpose of reducing the jail population without taking into account the nature of the charge, the individual's criminal history, the likelihood of the defendant's flight risk, will he show up, and the likelihood of the danger that he may pose to witnesses or victims or to the community at large are things I think that the judge has to take into account in setting the bond and determining whether or not that person is a risk or not if released.
So given the remaining population, you do believe that we're trying to reduce it another 20% may endanger public safety?
Again, I think that you're talking about bail considerations. Yeah. Bail considerations are an individual. That pertains to the individual who appears before the judge. Again, if the judge believes that that person can be released without posing any danger, that person will show up, then I would certainly support that. And I also think another thing is extremely important about this. Keep in mind that many of the things we're talking about, the programs or the services, education, job training, substance abuse, mental health issues, do not get addressed when the person is immediately released from jail. Now, I see the United States Attorney for the Eastern District is here, which reminds me of the federal system. When someone is released from the federal system, they are required to report to a case manager. And then you start working on that individual to try to prevent him or her from coming into the system immediately. Address the issues that need to be addressed. The earlier you address them, the better the chance you have of success. We unfortunately don't have the resources, we don't have the necessary funds to start addressing those issues from the moment the person gets out of jail. And we have to ultimately wait until hopefully I can place them in a diversion program in my office, or the judge gives them probation, and then the services can be directed.
You're shaking your head.
Right, I'm going to wholeheartedly disagree with you on that. First of all, so, we have at the court instituted the pretrial services program where we are attempting to get people who are nonviolent offenders, release them from jail, and help reduce the jail population. And the DA, and I have to be honest, Mr. Cannizzaro, you have not been a willing participant in this. And these are programs, right, to allow people to attempt to do as the federal system does and get people in these programs early in the system to get those same things that you're just saying. And so, this is something that we have been placing into effect, trying to do this, and you have not been a willing participant in this program. That's the first thing I want to say, but I have to go back for a second and address when we talked about recidivism, and you also talked about the 90% of the people in the jail that are violent offenders. And so I think, number one, it would have to depend on how you're defining violent offenders, right? Because recently you defined a simple battery as a violent offense. And so I would disagree with you on those numbers and how you're defining these things. I don't think that 90% of the people in the jail right now are violent offenders. I don't think that when we talk about recidivism, I think that what people get misconceived about is that we think that these are people who are committing violent crimes, right? And so I think it's important to really focus in on that. If we are talking, none of us want violent offenders to keep reoffending. But if people aren't violent, right? And so the fact is, and you have to give people a chance, if people aren't violent, if you have an offense or somebody who keeps committing a theft or keeps committing certain crimes that aren't violent offenses, then I don't think that those people should just constantly keep going to jail. I have to be honest with you. And then when you talked about the probation and the conditions on probation, I don't give first offenders a bunch of conditions. I don't give people a bunch of conditions that I think people will fail. So honestly, if you're a first offender, I'm not going to give you any conditions. I don't mandate drug tests. I don't mandate GEDs. I don't mandate those things because I don't want people to not be successful. I want people to ultimately be successful. And so the fact is, I'm not going to put a bunch of barriers that people will not be able to cross.
Let me get the other. Sheriff, you started by saying that you thought you could further reduce the jail population. The DA has talked about, he believes there's a risk in being too rigid in trying to reduce the remaining population, given who it is. Where do you think the opportunity is for further reduction? And is he right that there is a danger in terms of public safety?
First, I see why I'm sitting between you.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't do that. I didn't do it.
Yeah. You see why I'm on the far end, too.
No, I
Things
think,
aren't always as random as they seem.
Yes.
no, look, we have, for example, when you talk about probation and parolees, we have a day reporting center that provides that support structure for people that are about to go back to jail. They come, they report every day for 8, they stay there for 4. We help them with job skills. We help them with thinking for change. Those are the kind of support systems that have to be a part of things like the Safety and Justice Challenge Grant that we were a co-applicant for, and were successful in getting it. Thankfully, along with the criminal justice reform in Louisiana, we're getting more funds to make that a more vibrant program, to be able to do more for that. I think probationers and parolees make up a significant part of that potential for reduction. It's there that we have an opportunity to keep people who have made a mistake from going right back in. Because look, the DA is right. There are conditions, maybe not imposed by Judge Johnson, but by others that they have to do certain things, and it's difficult for people that once they've been incarcerated to come back out and say, I'm going to just do everything right. So they need that extra helping hand. They need that support structure, as we all need a support structure.
Yeah.
Well,
I just
want to. I sit on a board with a state director of probation and parole, and he put to me one time in a meeting, he's like, I got this guy, he's in, my agent is really befuddled as to what to do. And he works, takes care of his family, pays his bill on time. Every time they test, he's positive for weed. That's one of his conditions. He can't use. What would you suggest I do, Derwyn? I said, how about nothing? How about nothing? Let that man be a husband and father. Let that man go to work every day. And every time he gives you a dirty test, say, man, it's another dirty test. Are you late on any of your bills? No. Are you a father to your children? Yes. Are you a husband to your wife? Yes. Well, I guess we just got to chalk this one up to another dirty test. Like, that's the problem with a system that is hell-bent on pushing people into a sort of one-size-fits-all and destroying their sort of humanity in all this. Like, every time folks speak on, particularly on the jail side, law enforcement side, most times, you cease to be a person. I had a staff member who told me, the criminal justice system splits you into at least 3 people. To the sheriff, you're an inmate. To the court, you're a defendant. And to the police, you're a suspect. You fail to be your person. And even now, there's 1,100 inmates in the prison. Not people. There's 1,100 inmates. No, I say there's 1,100 people in that jail. People who deserve us to rethink this better, to regain our own humanity by bringing humanity back into a system so that maybe it'll be more successful. And to that, there's nothing wrong with an early reporting center being in the community. I don't know if they're coming in on their own free will, why they gotta go to jail? Like, let's normalize being a member of your community. Have them report at their local school, their church, another nonprofit. Push those dollars that are now doing this inside the walls and build community capacity so folks can stay in their community.
I want to bring in the audience in a moment. Did you want to respond?
Again, I just wanted to say, in response to the judge, certainly, Judge, we're not involved in the pretrial services because it's a judicial function. It really does not involve the district attorney's office, and that's why we do not participate. The judge makes a determination as to who is to be released and who is to participate in that program or not. With regard to the conditions of probation, I would take issue with that also. It seems to me that and I'm not talking about people, Derwyn, who come in with possessing marijuana or people who test positive for marijuana. I understand that issue, and I think that many of the judges do not put people in jail simply because they test dirty for marijuana. But I do think that we find people with more serious substance abuse issues, like when someone tests for cocaine or heroin. I think that without the drug test, without you having the benefit of that, Judge, it makes it very difficult for you to determine how it is that person can be best helped to address that issue. You certainly don't want him or her out there if they have that sort of a substance problem, because we all know, and evidence tends to support this, that they're inclined to go out and commit other crimes and end up back in the system again. And certainly I do agree, Derwyn, look, I'd love to see all of for instance, the halfway houses, the substance abuse facilities, the mental health facilities, in the communities, in the neighborhoods where people who are most affected by this live. But unfortunately, we don't have it there. So again, it's sort of incumbent on the sheriff. The sheriff doesn't have the responsibility to do that. That's nowhere really in his sort of dictates or his demands. But he does it because, again, it's a service he provides to the community. And I'm thankful for him for doing that, because every person he saves is one less person, and there's a multiplier or rippling effect. Those are family members that are saved and other people who are not subjected to this justice system or being victims of the justice system.
Let's bring in the audience. We have... yeah, only because the time is... I'm guessing there are a few questions. Wherever, yeah.
Hi, my name is Shauna Begard. I'm here with Families and Friends of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children. And I guess one of my main questions is, how are we going to address the equity in a juvenile justice system given three things? One, given the fact that even the quote-unquote New Orleans, we see a replication of the plantation mentality. And when I say that, even the services that we provide, like Cafe Reconcile, which I love, Grow That, which I love, we're actually training children to work jobs that will not afford them to live in the city of New Orleans. Prep cooks and servants, which, by the way, and working in a field is something we've been doing for 400 years. So we look at these systems and the programs we're providing, especially with rent upwards of $1,000 to $1,400.
Yeah.
We are actually putting people through programs which we know will not afford them to live and take care of themselves and even provide themselves with food and roofs, right? And then we wonder why they commit crimes. So the question becomes, and I know this because I've been working in this system for a while, it's a pay-to-play system. So if you already have wealth and money, you're fine. You can bail yourself out, you can avail yourself services. But if you're poor, which is 85% of our public school children are free and reduced lunch. How is this in any way gonna do anything but further this plantation model where we keep Black and brown children under the foot of oppression if we continue to do this?
Let's let the panel respond.
Well, I was actually thinking about this the other day in watching an interview with Bernie Sanders, and the question was reparations. What would you support reparations? And he said, I support Clyburn's bill, which is 10% of federal dollars to communities with 20% poverty who've been experiencing that poverty for 30 years, right? Now what that does is, if you do it right, the best you do is you free opportunity, right? You can focus that in free opportunity, but you'll never free equity. Inequity is something entirely different. If I give you a 400-year lead in a race, and then 400 years you have a moment of clarity, this ain't fair. And then he's like, okay, you can start running now too. You'll never catch up as long as that other person is still running. redistribution of opportunity will not bring us equity. So we need to think deeper on how we can redistribute actual real resources to communities so that we can actually begin to dig into that 400-year lead.
Let's try to get someone else. Yes.
I'm Fox Rich, and I'm from the great city of New Orleans. Yes. And I just want to take a moment and thank the Atlantic and Safety and Justice for having this conversation about race and justice here in the best city in the whole wide world. And I'm just glad that they brought together some of the people in this city that are doing the work, because there are amazing people in this room that is going to make sure that the things that we need to further our community actually happens. Thank you for the conversation.
Oh, okay. Well, let's see. Let's get it. Thank you. Oh, there's a question up here. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Kim Ford, and I recently chaired the campaign to recall our district attorney, Mr. Leon Cannizzaro. So we have a historic moment because this is the first time that we've actually ever met.
No.
See, because
All right,
I only know you.
We do need a question, not a
I
speech.
only know you from when our district attorney was willing to break the law to enforce the law.
All right, I need a question,
So that's why I
though.
tried to recall him. So in light of that, sir, I just want to thank you for not running again for your office, because it's time for you to go. So that being said, what do you leave for the next district attorney who's going to have to come behind you and sweep up for a more opportune system for our community?
Okay. Do you want to?
Sure, well, certainly, Ms. Ford, I certainly appreciate your participation in the political process. I guess, fortunately for me, you were not able to get the necessary signatures to recall me, and I certainly appreciate that effort. But I have not made any decisions as to whether or not I will run again or not for this office. But so if you have to, but again, I appreciate your energy and your enthusiasm, and God bless you.
I'm going to ask a final question. And I'm going back to something you were talking about, which was, not only decades, centuries of compounding inequities. That in many ways, the criminal justice system is one of the systems that is both implicated in those inequities, but is also being asked now more urgently than before to respond to those inequities. And I want to ask you, and I thought the first questioner was going to kind of raise this, how far can the criminal justice system go in terms of responding to inequities that extend beyond the criminal justice system? When you have a city where the share of African Americans and even Latino families that live in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty is vastly higher than among whites, where the college attainment rate for whites is almost four times that for African American adults in the city, one of the widest disparities in the country. What can reasonably be asked of the criminal justice system? And Judge, let me start with you. If you're saying that children, young people are starting off in such a vastly different place, how much can you take that into account? How much can that shape what you do and what you choose to do?
Well, I mean, I definitely think that there is a lot to be done, but I think that it can be done. I think that, we have to obviously look at the bail system. I think that eventually we should and would move to the detention versus non-detention, which would make things more fair, where it's based on violent crimes being, detained, or looking at the crime and not your access to economic status, which is going to determine whether or not you are actually going to be released. I think that you have to start at looking at those types of things. And once we start implementing things such as that and continue to build on what we have done, I mean, we have a long way to go, but we've come a long way. I think that a lot of people don't realize just how far we have come. Programs like the reentry courts, drug courts in the city. So we've made a lot of progress working together with the different agencies, with the city, being able to do pretrial services. These things have been tremendous. Being able to drop the jail numbers have been tremendous, and honestly, in a short amount of time. And so this has taken a lot of hard work, a lot of effort for all of those of us who have participated in it. So while we still have work to do, I think we've come a long way, and we've just kind of got to keep our eye on the prize.
Mr. Pelton?
Well, first do no harm.
Yeah.
That's what I say. one way we can help, just first do no harm. Don't overreact. I went to law school with a buddy who would organize his law school classes so that he could start smoking weed on Thursday and stop on Tuesday, right? And he's now a partner in a major firm. I had a friend who loved...
Still holding to that schedule? Or no?
I'm afraid to ask. Another buddy who loved the recreational use of prescription drugs and was a federal Ninth Circuit clerk and almost made it to the Supreme Court for Souter. I ain't giving no names, but they seem to be doing fine, right? They seem to be doing fine. So first, do no harm. Is what I'd say. And then next, let's start looking at how we can all, going back to working together, row in the same direction and making sure folks get the help they need if they do come in contact with our system, and do it in a way that is going to help repair communities and not tear them apart. I think that's one of the things we can absolutely do. And being able to, look, if we want to get better, we have to confront our brutal facts, right? Our system was born and bred, baked in with racism and inequity, and not be afraid to say that. Not be afraid to talk about that, and not be afraid to confront it. So that if you don't talk about it, if you pretend it's not there, it's not going to go away. I think that's what we understand. It's like, maybe if I just don't say he's black, I won't keep arresting all these black people. Like, that's not true. We had, I think it was 2015, 100% of the admits in our youth study center, our juvenile prison, juvenile jail, were African Americans. 100%. Right? That's not a good thing. That's not, 100% on a spelling test is a great thing. 100% of your admittees being black children calls into question, do you believe black children are children at all? And first, do no harm.
Mr. D, I want to give you a chance to say one final thing. We've got to give the stage before they give us the hook, and Mr. Sheriff. But real quick, public officials are judged not only by equity, and increasingly judged by equity, but also by public safety. And I'm interested in the extent to which you think those two things are in tension, or are they complementary? Equity in the criminal justice system and public safety for the community. Yeah.
So look, I got to go back to this, what we were talking about, which is part of public safety. Everybody in this room has a role to play in public safety. The spotlight is on us, but everybody has a part to do. And when we all come together, when we all focus on all of the issues that are important, look, I hire people that have been incarcerated before. They don't work as deputies, but they work in the jail. They work as electricians, plumbers. They work. They work. And giving people opportunity that have made mistakes is a big step towards achieving this public safety.
Certainly, to answer your initial question, I do think there are limitations on the criminal justice system. With regard to equity in the public safety or the enforcing of the law, certainly equity plays a very significant factor in what we do. For instance, I have a diversion program in the district attorney's office. In the 10 years I've been in office, we've put almost 5,000 people through that program. Those are people who never had to suffer the stigma of a conviction. And again, it was with the emphasis on trying to improve them, to try to prevent them from being a recidivist, to emphasize that they get an education, that they maintain employment, address substance abuse or mental health issues. And so I do think there are limits. I think, as the judge referred to, the drug court. I was one of the beginners of the drug court when I was a judge in district court way back in the early 90s. We instituted a drug court, and it was like the judge being essentially involved in the individual's probation. And it was trying to make sure that that person was doing the things he or she was supposed to do to not get in jail, not get incarcerated, continue on the path of being a good citizen, of contributing to our society, of raising the family, and being a role model for others. So certainly there is a great deal of equity involved in what we do.
Yeah. Well, listen, I want to thank you all for being here. Audience, please join me in thanking the panel. Yeah. And we've gone over. We could go on a long time more. But I think you've given us a lot to think about, so we appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right.